Imagine this, you're just trying to enjoy your quiet suburban life, following all the rules, paying your HOA fees on time, keeping your lawn perfect. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a group of so-called HOA police show up at your door, flashing fake badges, claiming you've broken some ridiculous rule, and threatening to arrest you. Only problem? They're not real cops. And the moment you reveal you're actually an FBI agent, everything explodes into chaos. This isn't some TV drama, it's what really happened to me. The entitled HOA board thought they could run their own little law enforcement operation until their entire scam was exposed, and justice came knocking hard. Here's how it all went down. Jake Collins thought moving into the gated community would be the fresh start he needed. After years on the road with the FBI, undercover assignments in countless cities, and sleepless nights tracking dangerous criminals, the idea of settling into a quiet neighborhood was a welcome change. The manicured lawns, the quiet streets lined with identical houses, and the polite nods from neighbors all painted the picture of safety and order. This was exactly what Jake wanted for himself and his kids: peace, stability, and a place where no one asked too many questions. But the reality of life under the Homeowners Association soon started to unravel the peaceful facade. From the moment Jake moved in, it was clear the HOA had its own agenda. The board, led by Karen Mitchell, was notorious for enforcing rules with an iron fist. They weren't just concerned about the community looking good from the street, they controlled everything, from how high your grass could grow to what color you could paint your front door. Jake had heard horror stories about petty fines and endless disputes, but he hadn't expected to experience it firsthand so soon. It began subtly enough. One morning, Jake found a letter slipped under his door, a formal notice from the HOA complaining about the unauthorized items visible in his front yard. A basketball hoop he had left out after his son's game was considered a violation because it wasn't supposed to be left outside overnight. Jake smiled to himself. Of all things to get a complaint about, it was a basketball hoop. But it was a sign that the HOA was watching, scrutinizing every little detail. As days went by, the list of complaints grew. The HOA sent warnings for garbage bins left out too long, for a neighbor's barbecue smoke drifting into someone else's yard, and for Jake's daughter's garden gnome, which apparently was not in harmony with the community's aesthetic standards. It became clear that the HOA wasn't interested in fostering a friendly neighborhood but in exerting control, making sure everyone toed the line perfectly. The board meetings were another matter altogether. Jake decided to attend one, curious to see who was behind this overbearing group. What he found was a room filled with self-appointed rulers, people obsessed with rules and order, wielding their power like a weapon. Karen Mitchell, the HOA president, dominated the meetings with a sharp tongue and a cold glare. She made it clear that any dissent would be met with swift penalties. The atmosphere was tense, with neighbors afraid to speak out lest they become targets themselves. It wasn't long before Jake noticed that the HOA wasn't just about rules, it was about power. They seemed to thrive on intimidating residents into submission. Jake watched neighbors get fined for things that seemed absurd, like leaving their trash can slightly askew or having a mailbox that wasn't exactly the right shade of black. Many people paid the fines quietly, unwilling to fight the system or risk escalating the conflict. Despite the pressure, Jake stayed calm. His background in law enforcement made him cautious. He knew that behind the polished veneer of the HOA, there might be something deeper, something worth investigating. After all, this community wasn't just about perfect lawns and neat fences. It was about control, and where there's control, there's often corruption. Jake started talking to other residents, quietly gathering stories. Some shared frustrations about the HOA's heavy-handed tactics, but few were willing to speak openly. Fear of retaliation was real, and the HOA seemed to have ways of making life difficult for those who challenged it. One neighbor told Jake about how her family had been targeted repeatedly after she complained about unfair fines, and how they eventually gave up and moved out. Another described a shadowy enforcement team the HOA had started to deploy, people who weren't police officers but acted like they had some kind of authority. This piqued Jake's interest even more. Why would a homeowners association need an enforcement team? What were they really up to behind the scenes? These questions kept Jake awake at night. He knew he couldn't just stand by. Something about this neighborhood was off, and he was determined to find out what. What made it even stranger was how deeply some of the HOA members seemed to believe in their own righteousness. They talked about protecting property values and maintaining the community standard as if it were a noble cause, but their actions were far from noble. It felt more like a vendetta against anyone who didn't fit their ideal mold. And Jake, with his quiet confidence and refusal to back down, was starting to attract their attention. On his first few days, Jake had thought the HOA was just another bureaucracy, annoying but harmless. But as the restrictions piled up and the atmosphere grew more hostile, he realized this was something much darker. It wasn't just about lawns and trash cans. It was about control through fear. The HOA wasn't just an organization, it was a machine, and Karen Mitchell was the one steering it with an iron grip. Jake understood that pushing back against such a system would be difficult. These people had built walls around the community, both physical and psychological. They were experts at making residents feel powerless. But Jake wasn't most residents. He had resources, training, and a sense of justice that wouldn't let him walk away quietly. Whatever the HOA was hiding, he was ready to uncover it. And so, what had started as a simple desire for peace was quickly turning into a battle for freedom. The neighborhood Jake had hoped would be a refuge was instead becoming a cage, one that he intended to break open, no matter what it took. The homeowners association's grip on the neighborhood tightened rapidly. What had begun as a few petty rules and annoying letters soon escalated into a full-scale campaign of control and intimidation. The HOA board, under Karen Mitchell's leadership, was no longer content with simply sending warnings or imposing fines. They wanted to enforce their authority directly and visibly, a way to remind residents who was truly in charge. To that end, the HOA created a so-called enforcement squad, a group of individuals dressed in uniforms and equipped with badges that looked official but were completely fake. This move sent shockwaves through the community. The enforcement team wasn't made up of actual law enforcement officers, nor were they authorized by any legal authority. They were hired by the HOA and given the power to confront residents over violations, or what the board deemed violations. Their presence was unsettling. It blurred the line between legitimate authority and overreach, casting a shadow of fear over the neighborhood. People began to second-guess themselves, worrying whether a minor infraction might bring an unexpected visit from these self-appointed enforcers. The enforcement team patrolled the streets, stopping residents to question them about supposed rule-breaking. They handed out citations and demanded immediate compliance, all under the threat of escalating fines or other penalties. For many, it felt like living in a police state disguised as a suburban community. Yet, when residents asked for proof of the enforcer's authority, the HOA insisted everything was legitimate and within their rights as the governing body. Karen Mitchell's justification was always the same: property values, community standards, and safety. She claimed the enforcement team was necessary to maintain order and protect the neighborhood from decline. However, beneath these polished explanations, there was a clear hunger for control. The board members enjoyed the power they wielded and were quick to punish anyone who dared to challenge them. It wasn't just about rules anymore, it was about domination. The impact on the residents was immediate and divisive. Some neighbors welcomed the enforcement team, believing the strict oversight would keep the community safe and pristine. They viewed complaints about the HOA as petty grievances and were quick to report anyone who stepped out of line. Others, however, felt trapped and bullied. Families who had lived in the neighborhood for years found themselves targeted over trivial issues, subjected to intimidating visits and warnings that sometimes bordered on harassment. Stories circulated about the enforcement team's tactics. One resident was stopped for mowing his lawn too early in the morning, receiving a citation and a stern warning to avoid disturbing the peace. Another was reprimanded for parking a truck with a faded bumper sticker, the officers insisting it violated the community's image. Even children were not spared. Parents complained about the team telling kids they weren't allowed to play basketball in the driveway after dusk, citing noise ordinances that were never officially documented. The enforcement team's aggressive behavior went beyond rule enforcement. It was about sending a message. They were the eyes and hands of a board that wanted absolute obedience. Their presence instilled a climate of suspicion, where neighbors watched each other nervously, afraid to speak up or break the unspoken rules. Social gatherings became subdued, conversations guarded. The neighborhood was no longer a place of community but a place of compliance. Behind the scenes, rumors began to spread about the enforcement team's true nature. Some whispered that members of the squad had questionable backgrounds, hired more for their willingness to intimidate than any actual skill. Others suspected that Karen and the board were using the enforcement team to settle personal vendettas under the guise of rule enforcement. A few brave residents tried to gather evidence but found themselves stonewalled at every turn, the HOA refusing to disclose contracts, policies, or any legal basis for the team's existence. This cloak of secrecy only fueled the growing unease. Residents started questioning whether the HOA was operating within the bounds of the law at all. After all, no neighborhood had the right to deputize civilians as police officers, issue citations, or make arrests. The line between private governance and public law enforcement was clear in theory, but in this community, it was dangerously blurred. For Jake Collins, these developments confirmed his suspicions. The HOA's creation of a fake police force was more than just a power grab, it was a symptom of something deeper and more corrupt. His experience in federal investigations told him that wherever there was a misuse of authority, there was likely illegal activity behind it. He began digging into the HOA's records, contracts, and finances, searching for any signs of wrongdoing or abuse. His inquiries revealed that the enforcement squad was contracted through a shell company linked to one of the HOA board members. Payments were disguised under vague descriptions, and attempts to request transparency were met with evasive answers or outright refusals. It became clear the enforcement team was not just a misguided experiment but part of a larger scheme to consolidate control and intimidate dissenters. The intimidation extended beyond residents. Local law enforcement had been called a few times, but when officers arrived, they found no legitimate basis for arrests or enforcement actions by the HOA team. This created friction between the real police and the HOA, further complicating matters. Yet, the HOA persisted, emboldened by the community's reluctance to challenge them outright. Meanwhile, Jake noticed how the enforcement team's actions disproportionately targeted certain residents, often newcomers, minorities, or anyone who didn't conform to the board's narrow vision. It wasn't just about rules, it was about exclusion and maintaining a certain image at all costs. This realization strengthened Jake's resolve. He couldn't allow this kind of injustice to continue unchecked. The atmosphere in the neighborhood grew heavier with each passing day. What was supposed to be a safe haven was now a battleground of wills, where freedom was sacrificed for conformity and silence for fear. The enforcement team represented the very worst of authoritarianism disguised in suburban normalcy, and Jake was determined to be the one to stop it. The stakes were higher than ever. The fake enforcement squad was more than a nuisance, it was a threat to the community's integrity and the residents' rights. Jake's investigation was no longer just about uncovering corruption, it was about protecting people from a growing tyranny disguised as neighborhood watchfulness. As the tension mounted, it became clear that a confrontation was inevitable. The HOA had crossed a line, and Jake was ready to push back, armed not just with his FBI training but with the truth that could bring the whole operation crashing down. The day the fake HOA police came to Jake's door marked a turning point. The enforcement squad had shifted from passive intimidation to direct confrontation. Their uniforms were convincing enough at first glance, dark polos emblazoned with an HOA emblem, tactical style belts, and badges that gleamed like those worn by real officers. They arrived confidently, fully convinced that their makeshift authority granted them the right to detain residents who disobeyed the HOA's rigid rules. The incident started over something minor. Jake's trash cans had been left out a few hours past the HOA's designated pickup window. For most, this would mean a polite warning or a small fine. But here, it was treated like a criminal offense. The officers insisted that Jake was in violation and demanded identification. When he provided it, they immediately questioned his status in the community and threatened arrest for what they called willful noncompliance. It quickly became apparent the fake officers were less interested in rules and more in exerting power. Their tone was aggressive, bordering on hostile, as if trying to provoke a reaction. They had rehearsed their lines, spoke in clipped commands, and tried to intimidate Jake into submission. They demanded he stop whatever they considered a violation immediately or face legal consequences. Despite the tension, Jake remained calm. His years in federal law enforcement had trained him to assess threats logically and keep control of any situation. When they insisted on searching his property without a warrant or legal grounds, Jake politely but firmly declined. That only seemed to escalate their aggression. They warned him that refusal would be seen as obstruction and grounds for detainment. What made the situation surreal was the absurdity of the claims. These weren't actual police officers empowered by law, yet they were acting as if they had full authority to arrest and penalize him on the spot. They demanded to see his ID again, and when Jake produced his FBI badge alongside his driver's license, the room shifted instantly. The confidence of the HOA enforcers wavered, their bravado cracking under the weight of real authority. Seeing the FBI badge stunned them. Their faces betrayed disbelief and panic, the kind that comes when a carefully constructed illusion shatters. Jake could see the wheels turning. They realized they had targeted the wrong person, someone who was more than capable of exposing their illegal operation. Instead of retreating gracefully, the fake officers doubled down, insisting the badge must be fake, accusing Jake of impersonating a federal agent. They tried to turn the tables, but Jake was prepared. He calmly explained that his badge was authentic and that impersonating an officer was a serious federal crime, punishable by severe penalties. The standoff stretched for several tense minutes, the fake HOA enforcers unsure whether to back down or escalate the conflict. Their lack of legal training was glaring. They didn't know how to respond to a real federal agent asserting his authority. Jake used the moment to warn them that any further harassment or false claims could lead to criminal charges against them and the HOA board. The HOA enforcers finally backed off, leaving with vague threats but no arrests. The experience left Jake shaken but resolute. He realized the fake police were more than just a nuisance, they were a dangerous and illegal force that had no place operating in a residential community. Following the confrontation, Jake took immediate action. He documented everything, their uniforms, badges, the threats made, and his own credentials. He began contacting legal authorities, preparing to expose the HOA's fake enforcement team to real law enforcement agencies. The stakes were high, these fake cops were operating with impunity, intimidating residents and overstepping boundaries that threatened everyone's rights. Word of the encounter spread quickly among neighbors. Some were shocked that such a brazen group had been roaming the streets, others felt vindicated, having experienced similar intimidation but never daring to confront it. Jake's calm handling of the situation inspired many, showing that standing up to unlawful authority was possible and necessary. The fake HOA police had underestimated their target. They didn't realize that Jake was not only a resident but an experienced federal agent trained to recognize and dismantle illegal operations. Their arrogance in thinking they could intimidate residents without consequence was about to be their downfall. As Jake prepared to escalate the case, he knew this confrontation was just the beginning. The HOA's fake police had crossed a dangerous line by attempting to arrest him, a federal agent. There was no going back from here. It was time for the real law to intervene and for the HOA's reign of terror to be brought into the harsh light of justice. The incident also raised bigger questions about the HOA's operation. How many other residents had they harassed or threatened? How far did the HOA's corruption run? Jake's experience galvanized a growing movement in the community demanding transparency and accountability. It became clear that exposing the fake enforcement squad was not just about one man's rights but about protecting an entire neighborhood from abuse. Jake's encounter proved one undeniable truth: power without legal authority was dangerous and illegal, no matter how official it looked. The fake badges and uniforms were nothing more than props, and Jake was ready to prove that the HOA's facade would not hold against the truth and the law. This moment marked the shift from silent suffering to active resistance in the community. No longer would residents accept intimidation. No longer would fake authority figures roam unchecked. The battle for justice in this quiet suburban neighborhood was just heating up. The fallout from Jake's confrontation with the fake HOA police was swift and profound. What had begun as a private battle soon escalated into a full-blown community crisis. Residents, who had long felt powerless against the overbearing HOA board, found a rallying point in Jake's courage and determination. His exposure of the enforcement squad's illegitimacy sparked outrage and disbelief across the neighborhood, igniting discussions that had been simmering under the surface for years. The first wave of response came from within the community itself. Neighbors started to share their own stories of harassment, intimidation, and unfair treatment at the hands of the HOA's faux enforcers. These accounts revealed a pattern of abuse, fines levied arbitrarily, personal property threatened, and an atmosphere of fear maintained through bullying tactics. Many residents had endured these injustices silently, afraid of retaliation or convinced that no one would listen. Now, empowered by Jake's example, they found their voices. Community meetings, once sparsely attended and dominated by the HOA board, began filling with concerned homeowners demanding answers and reforms. The board's previously untouchable image crumbled under the weight of growing dissent. Karen Mitchell and her closest allies scrambled to maintain control, but their attempts at damage control only made matters worse. Publicly, they insisted the enforcement squad was legitimate and necessary. Privately, their confidence was shaken. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, drawn by the unusual nature of a homeowners association deploying a fake police force. Reporters arrived, cameras rolling, to capture the palpable tension in the neighborhood. Interviews with residents painted a picture of an authoritarian HOA that had overstepped legal boundaries in its quest for control. The story quickly gained traction, turning what was once a quiet suburban community into a headline-making controversy. Legal experts weighing in on the situation confirmed what many suspected: the HOA's actions were not just unethical but illegal. Homeowners associations have limited authority to enforce community rules, but they do not possess police powers or the right to detain or arrest residents. Impersonating law enforcement officers is a criminal offense, carrying significant penalties. The existence of a police squad without official sanction was a blatant violation of state laws and residents' constitutional rights. Armed with this information, Jake coordinated efforts to take the matter to the appropriate authorities. He contacted the local police department and the district attorney's office, presenting detailed evidence of the HOA's illegal enforcement team, including photographs, recorded interactions, and testimony from residents. His status as an FBI agent lent credibility and urgency to the case, ensuring that officials took swift action. The legal system responded accordingly. Investigations were launched into the HOA board's activities, focusing on the creation and operation of the fake police squad. Subpoenas were issued for financial records, contracts, and communications, uncovering a tangled web of deception and self-dealing. The shell company through which the enforcement team was contracted was exposed as a front controlled by board members, raising questions about kickbacks and misuse of HOA funds. Facing mounting legal pressure and public scrutiny, the HOA board attempted to disband the enforcement team. However, the damage had already been done. Residents' trust was shattered, and many began organizing a formal recall of board members, including Karen Mitchell. Petitions circulated, signatures gathered, and meetings called to replace the leadership with representatives committed to transparency and fairness. At the same time, civil lawsuits were filed on behalf of residents who had suffered harassment or threats from the fake police squad. These suits sought damages for emotional distress, violations of civil rights, and abuse of power. The legal battles underscored the serious consequences of the HOA's overreach and the need for stronger safeguards against such abuses in the future. Jake's role evolved beyond that of a whistleblower. He became a community leader and advocate, working closely with neighbors and legal counsel to ensure that the HOA's transgressions were fully addressed. His FBI background provided valuable insight into investigative processes and legal strategies, helping residents navigate what was otherwise a daunting and complex situation. The experience also sparked broader conversations about the nature and limits of homeowners associations. What started as a conflict in one neighborhood resonated with homeowners nationwide who had faced similar struggles. Media coverage brought attention to the potential for abuse when HOAs wield unchecked power, fueling calls for reform and greater oversight. In response, some local and state lawmakers began drafting legislation to clarify and restrict the authority of HOAs, particularly regarding enforcement mechanisms. Proposals included banning unauthorized police squads, requiring transparency in contracts and finances, and providing residents with stronger protections against retaliation and harassment. Despite the legal victories and political momentum, healing the community's wounds proved more challenging. Years of fear and mistrust could not be erased overnight. Many residents remained wary of the HOA's influence, vigilant against any attempts to regain control through covert means. The neighborhood's social fabric was strained, and rebuilding a sense of community and safety became a priority. Jake recognized that restoring trust required more than legal action, it demanded engagement and openness. He helped organize neighborhood forums, social events, and collaborative initiatives designed to foster communication and cooperation among residents. These efforts gradually replaced suspicion with solidarity, empowering people to participate in shaping the future of their community. The ordeal also transformed Jake personally. What began as a fight to protect his own rights had grown into a mission to defend the principles of justice and fairness for his neighbors. He found renewed purpose in standing up to abuses of power and advocating for those who felt voiceless. His experience reinforced the belief that no one, whether an HOA board or any authority, was above the law. As the legal processes continued and the neighborhood slowly healed, the story of the fake HOA police became a cautionary tale. It highlighted the dangers of unchecked power in communities and the importance of vigilance, courage, and collective action. For the residents, it was a hard-earned lesson in standing up against injustice and reclaiming their right to live free from fear and intimidation. Ultimately, the exposure and dismantling of the HOA's fake enforcement squad marked a victory not just for Jake and his neighbors but for anyone who values the rule of law and the protection of individual rights against overreach. The neighborhood had faced an unprecedented challenge and emerged stronger, united by a shared commitment to justice and accountability. The dismantling of the fake HOA police squad was just the beginning of a long journey toward justice and reform. Once the truth came to light, the full scope of the HOA's corruption and abuse of power began to unravel, revealing a system designed to serve a select few rather than the community as a whole. The investigation uncovered how deeply entrenched the board members' manipulation was, including the use of intimidation tactics and financial schemes to maintain their grip on control. Financial records showed suspicious payments funneling through shell companies tied to the enforcement squad's operation. It became clear that the HOA leadership had profited personally from the fake police setup, charging exorbitant fees to residents under the guise of security and enforcement, while pocketing kickbacks. This abuse of residents' dues not only violated fiduciary responsibilities but also amounted to outright theft. As the district attorney's office prepared to file charges, the HOA board scrambled to cover their tracks. They attempted to destroy documents, erase digital communications, and silence whistleblowers within their ranks. But with Jake's federal training and persistence, key evidence was preserved and new witnesses came forward, emboldened by the growing movement against the board's corruption. Criminal charges against several board members soon followed, including fraud, embezzlement, impersonating law enforcement officers, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. The prospect of jail time sent shockwaves through the community, validating the residents' claims and exposing the true cost of unchecked HOA power. The fake police squad wasn't just an overreach, it was a calculated criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, the civil lawsuits filed by affected residents began progressing through the courts. Plaintiffs sought compensation for emotional distress, damages for unlawful detention attempts, and punitive damages to deter future abuses. These lawsuits served a dual purpose, holding the HOA accountable and sending a clear message that residents' rights could not be trampled without consequence. The legal battles attracted national attention, highlighting a rarely discussed but widespread problem: the potential for abuse in homeowners associations that operate with minimal oversight. Advocacy groups for tenant and homeowner rights used the case to push for legislation and reform, demanding clearer limits on HOA enforcement powers and stronger protections for residents. Amid the turmoil, the community faced a critical crossroads. Many residents wanted to dissolve the HOA entirely, believing its leadership had betrayed their trust beyond repair. Others saw the potential to rebuild a fair, transparent association that could manage community affairs responsibly and democratically. Jake, understanding the importance of community self-governance, supported efforts to reform rather than eliminate the HOA. He worked with neighborhood activists to develop a new governance framework emphasizing transparency, accountability, and resident participation. This included establishing an independent oversight committee, requiring open financial disclosures, and banning any form of armed or uniformed enforcement. The recall elections that followed were decisive. Long-standing board members associated with the fake police scandal were ousted by overwhelming majorities. New leadership, composed of residents committed to ethical practices and community service, took charge. They immediately set about rebuilding trust, opening channels for dialogue, and instituting fair policies that respected residents' rights and property. Rebuilding the neighborhood's social fabric took time. Jake helped coordinate community events, volunteer projects, and forums to foster connection and healing. These efforts gradually restored a sense of unity, empowering residents to feel ownership of their neighborhood again. The shared experience of overcoming corruption became a foundation for resilience. Jake's experience also inspired other communities facing similar challenges. He spoke at conferences and workshops, sharing lessons learned and strategies for standing up to abusive HOAs. His story became a beacon for those feeling powerless, showing that with knowledge, courage, and collective action, residents could reclaim control and protect their rights. The case prompted policymakers to take action. New laws were introduced in the state legislature to restrict the powers of HOAs, prohibit impersonation of law enforcement, and require greater transparency in association operations. These reforms aim to prevent future abuses and ensure that communities govern themselves with respect and fairness. Despite these successes, Jake remained vigilant. He knew that abuses of power often resurface where oversight is weak and complacency sets in. He continued monitoring HOA activities, encouraging residents to stay informed and involved. His role evolved from enforcer to advocate, committed to safeguarding community rights over the long term. The aftermath of the fake HOA police saga left an indelible mark on the neighborhood. What had begun as intimidation and fear ended in empowerment and justice. The residents reclaimed their community from corruption, setting a precedent for others to follow. The ordeal reinforced the principle that no group or individual is above the law, and that vigilance and unity are essential in protecting freedom. Jake's journey from targeted resident to community leader embodied the transformative power of standing up to injustice. His federal training gave him the tools, but it was his commitment to fairness and the support of his neighbors that brought real change. Together, they turned a dark chapter into a story of hope and renewal, proving that even the most entrenched abuses can be challenged and overcome. The fake HOA police were gone, but the lessons remained: power must be checked, rights must be defended, and communities must be active participants in their own governance. This neighborhood's victory became a testament to resilience and the enduring fight for justice in the face of corruption. The aftermath of the HOA scandal sparked a profound shift in the neighborhood's understanding of community governance and the responsibilities that came with it. Residents who had once been disengaged or indifferent became active participants in shaping the future of their community. The experience served as a wake-up call, demonstrating that ignoring local leadership or assuming that everything was managed properly could have serious consequences. This newfound vigilance became a cornerstone for rebuilding trust and ensuring that such abuses could never happen again. One of the most significant changes was the establishment of a community-led watchdog group tasked with overseeing HOA activities. This group was composed of volunteers from diverse backgrounds, united by a common goal: transparency and accountability. They monitored board meetings, reviewed financial documents, and provided regular updates to residents, ensuring no decision went unnoticed or unchallenged. The formation of this watchdog group represented a direct response to the secrecy and unchecked power that had allowed the fake police squad to flourish. Education became a key focus for the community. Workshops and seminars were organized to inform residents about their rights, the legal limits of HOA authority, and effective ways to participate in governance. Many discovered that understanding bylaws, voting procedures, and financial reports empowered them to hold their leaders accountable. This knowledge helped dismantle the fear and confusion that had previously paralyzed many homeowners. The HOA itself underwent structural reform. New bylaws were drafted to prevent conflicts of interest and eliminate any possibility of the board creating enforcement units or hiring outside contractors with unchecked authority. Term limits for board members were introduced to discourage the accumulation of power by any single individual or faction. Committees dedicated to ethics and compliance were established to provide oversight and rapid response to any potential misconduct. Residents also demanded that all financial records be audited annually by independent third parties. This measure was designed to ensure fiscal responsibility and detect any irregularities early on. Transparency reports were shared openly, fostering an environment of trust and collaboration between the board and homeowners. Communication channels improved dramatically. Where once residents felt isolated and ignored, now they had direct access to leadership through newsletters, online forums, and town hall meetings. The new board prioritized open dialogue, encouraging feedback and suggestions from the community. This inclusive approach helped bridge gaps and address concerns before they could escalate into conflict. Jake continued to play a pivotal role throughout this transformation. Beyond his initial efforts to expose the HOA's illegal activities, he remained deeply involved in community affairs. His background in federal law enforcement allowed him to advise on legal matters and help residents navigate complex issues. More importantly, his willingness to listen and collaborate made him a trusted figure, respected by neighbors across the board. His advocacy extended beyond his own neighborhood. Jake began connecting with other communities facing similar challenges, sharing insights and best practices. Through social media, webinars, and speaking engagements, he helped foster a network of empowered homeowners determined to reform their own HOAs. This ripple effect highlighted the widespread nature of the problem and the potential for collective action. Local government officials took note of the case and the subsequent reforms. Some invited Jake and community leaders to participate in advisory committees focused on housing and neighborhood governance. Their input helped shape policies aimed at protecting residents from abusive practices and ensuring that HOAs operated within clearly defined legal parameters. Despite these positive developments, challenges remained. The history of intimidation and abuse left scars that would take time to heal fully. Some residents were still wary of authority and cautious about trusting the new leadership. Rebuilding a sense of community cohesion required ongoing effort, patience, and empathy. To address this, the neighborhood launched initiatives aimed at fostering social bonds and mutual support. Volunteer-driven events, neighborhood cleanups, and community celebrations became regular occurrences. These activities provided opportunities for residents to connect on a personal level, breaking down barriers and strengthening relationships. The process of coming together helped restore a collective identity centered on respect and cooperation. Mental health resources were also introduced, recognizing the emotional toll the ordeal had taken on many families. Counseling services and support groups offered a safe space for residents to process trauma and rebuild confidence. These services were particularly important for those who had been directly targeted or threatened by the fake enforcement squad. The transformation of the neighborhood extended beyond governance and social programs. Property values stabilized and eventually improved, as the area's reputation shifted from one of conflict to one of resilience and reform. New families were drawn to the community, attracted by its renewed sense of safety and transparency. Throughout this process, the core lesson remained clear: active, informed participation by residents is essential to safeguarding rights and maintaining healthy communities. The experience underscored that complacency enables abuse, while vigilance and unity foster justice. Jake's journey reflected this truth. What began as a personal battle to protect his own rights evolved into a broader mission to empower an entire community. His role as both a catalyst and a guide demonstrated how individual courage combined with collective action can bring about meaningful change. The neighborhood story became a powerful example of overcoming corruption and reclaiming control through democratic principles. It served as a reminder that governance is not just about rules and regulations, but about trust, respect, and shared responsibility. In the years that followed, the community continued to build on the foundation laid during this challenging time. The reforms, education, and engagement initiatives became ingrained in the neighborhood's culture. Residents remained vigilant, understanding that the work of protecting their rights and dignity is ongoing. Ultimately, the ordeal with the fake HOA police became a defining moment, a catalyst for transformation and renewal. It showed that even in the face of deception and intimidation, communities can rise together to defend justice and build a better future. The legacy of that struggle lives on in the strengthened bonds, empowered residents, and transparent governance that now define the neighborhood. The final chapter of this saga solidified a powerful truth: the fight for justice and integrity within a community never truly ends, but each victory lays the groundwork for a safer, fairer future. As the dust settled on the fake HOA police scandal, the neighborhood had transformed from a place overshadowed by fear and manipulation into a beacon of resilience, empowerment, and reform. The lessons learned rippled far beyond the boundaries of the single community, sparking conversations, inspiring reforms, and offering hope to countless others facing similar battles. The legal aftermath saw several former HOA board members and their accomplices prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Their conviction sent a clear message that impersonation of law enforcement, abuse of authority, and financial corruption would not be tolerated. The sentences handed down served both justice and deterrence, reinforcing the principle that no one, regardless of their title or position, was above accountability. This outcome was not only a personal vindication for the residents but a public statement emphasizing the sanctity of civil rights and the rule of law. With the corrupt leadership removed and governance reforms firmly in place, the community began to thrive in new ways. The neighborhood association, rebuilt on principles of transparency and inclusivity, set a standard for how HOAs should operate. Its bylaws reflected a commitment to fairness and resident empowerment, prohibiting any form of armed enforcement and establishing multiple layers of oversight to prevent future abuses. The association became a model for other communities, demonstrating that proper governance was possible even after a crisis of this magnitude. The community's newfound strength attracted attention from policymakers, activists, and the media alike. Journalists featured the neighborhood story as a cautionary tale but also as an inspiring example of grassroots action prevailing against entrenched corruption. Lawmakers introduced legislation that tightened regulations on homeowners associations statewide, mandating regular audits, transparent elections, and clear prohibitions on HOA-controlled security forces. These reforms provided additional protections, making it harder for any HOA to wield unchecked power or skirt legal boundaries. Beyond the policy changes, the cultural shift within the community was profound. Residents embraced a sense of shared responsibility and active citizenship that permeated every aspect of neighborhood life. Annual meetings were no longer perfunctory, they became forums for open discussion and collaborative decision-making. Homeowners who had once felt powerless now held leadership roles, bringing diverse perspectives and renewed energy to governance. The social fabric of the neighborhood strengthened alongside these institutional reforms. Events celebrating diversity, inclusion, and community spirit flourished. The collective trauma experienced during the HOA police scandal was addressed openly, fostering empathy and healing. Residents developed a deeper understanding of the importance of vigilance, not only against external threats but also against complacency within their own ranks. Jake's role in this transformation became emblematic of how individual courage and expertise can galvanize a community. His journey from a targeted resident to a leader, advocate, and mentor inspired many. He continued to share his knowledge and experience, helping neighboring communities establish safeguards against similar abuses. His story was a reminder that knowledge of the law and determination to defend one's rights are powerful tools in the fight for justice. However, the neighborhood's vigilance did not wane with the arrival of peace. Residents understood that the structures they had built required ongoing maintenance, both in governance and in community spirit. Regular training sessions were held for board members and volunteers, emphasizing ethics, conflict resolution, and legal compliance. Communication channels remained robust, ensuring that any warning signs of misconduct or overreach could be quickly addressed. Importantly, the community cultivated a culture that valued transparency not just as a policy but as a daily practice. Financial disclosures, meeting minutes, and decision-making processes were made accessible through online portals and physical postings. This openness nurtured trust and discouraged secrecy, dismantling the very environment where corruption once thrived. The HOA's story also resonated on a broader scale, influencing national discussions about the role and power of homeowners associations across the United States. Advocates for homeowner rights used this case to highlight the dangers of privatized governance structures operating with insufficient oversight. The neighborhood's victory became a touchstone in campaigns for reform, helping to shift public perception and legislative priorities. Yet, despite the many achievements, residents remained mindful of the delicate balance between community autonomy and individual rights. They recognized that HOAs could be valuable instruments for maintaining property values and quality of life, if and only if they operated with integrity and accountability. The experience taught them that the true strength of any community lies in its people's willingness to participate actively and demand justice. In the end, the scandal involving the fake HOA police became more than a story about corruption and deception. It evolved into a powerful narrative about empowerment, resilience, and the enduring fight for fairness. It showed that when individuals refuse to accept injustice, when neighbors unite with purpose and clarity, and when communities commit to transparency and respect, even the most entrenched abuses can be uprooted. The neighborhood emerged not just restored but reborn, a community transformed by adversity and guided by newfound principles. The ordeal was a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, the necessity of constant vigilance, and the unbreakable bonds forged through collective struggle. It left behind a legacy of courage and hope that would inspire generations to come. Ultimately, the story reaffirmed an essential truth: justice is not guaranteed by institutions alone, but by the people who demand it, protect it, and live it every day. This community's journey illustrated that even in the darkest moments, the light of integrity and unity can prevail, guiding the way toward a better, fairer future for all. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales that inspire and empower. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up to injustice changed everything? Share your experience in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, community strength comes from each of us. Stay vigilant, stay united, and stay strong. Until next time, take care.